Hi there, welcome to the first segment of Millennial Travels, a simple segment of me making the most out of a trip in different locations. For this segment, the location is So with my Frontier Flight Pass, I decided I'm going to go to Miami as my first destination as a spur-of-the-moment deal, as I've never been to Miami and it would be a solo adventure. So I arrived at the Miami airport safely around midnight. The airport had a sleek design with some parts feeling a little bit more dated compared to the other airports I've been to. When I got to the exit, I booked an Uber as it was cheaper than Lyft at the time. So after a short ride, I arrived at my Airbnb in Little Havana, which was located in an apartment complex with other units. There was no elevator, so there was some extra exercise getting up to the third floor. The room was cozy and was better stocked than some hotels I've been to. If I was forced to complain about anything about the Airbnb, it would be that the Wi-Fi and phone data connection, at least in that area, was just almost like super slow or non-existent at this spot. The neighborhood was a little bit older, but quiet, which is what I wanted. For my first day in Miami, I walked to Little Havana with a plan to take pics and videos along the strip until I reached the restaurant called Sandwich, because I was hungry and I needed something to eat, so I was like, I saw this place as well reviewed, so I was going to go there. So I headed out, taking in the sights, enjoying some of the sunshine, while seeing all these curly-tailed lizards scurrying about, and chickens chilling out in some empty lots. The strip for Calle Ocho had many restaurants, cigar shops, some museums, and lots of wall art. After getting to Sandwich, I had my delicious Cuban sandwich, and I headed back the opposite way on the strip to catch the other half of the street. I stopped by a local grocery store called Presidente to grab some essentials, as I figure I can eat one meal at my room and one out at a place I've never eaten before. After getting my groceries, I stopped by the visitor center to browse and get some postcards to send to some folks back home. After leaving the visitor center, I heard some good violin music and found it coming from a local restaurant with a woman dancing in the front of the restaurant, and I decided I'd check it out. At first I thought there was some sort of event going on there because there was a lot of folks with like stickers on their shirts, but then it turned out they were part of some Miami bus tour. So I got me a mojito and I just kicked back in a chair to enjoy the AC and listen to like my own private violin show. After dropping off the groceries, I decided the next part of my journey was to find the Warner House, which I walked to with a vague idea of where it was located. On my laptop it seemed pretty simple, but when I tried looking up on my phone, it was just showing me all these different locations. So as I was walking, I didn't have much luck trying to find it, as it just kept giving me weird spots around Miami. Fast forward on this lovely walk, I found a raisable bridge near the side of the river that had a whole bunch of yachts by a gym. After getting the okay from the gym, I went through the place to take some pics of the yachts and relax a bit to admire some of these big old boats. It's not every day you get to see a gym on the side of the river with some big fancy expensive boats right beside it. So after this, I decided to walk along the river and find out if there was any other cool spots I could find that was similar to the gym. So after a while though, I decided I'm going to go back home, but I had to stop by this Publix first. And then I decided, after I got some turkey bacon, that it was time to end the day and go home. So after the hot and tiring walk from the previous day, I decided I was going to take advantage of the public transit for Miami. Now with the public transit, the Metro Mover and the trolleys are free. The buses and monorails are not though, so you'll need to pay with cash or with the Go Miami Pass. I decided I would go with the app version, as you can easily pay for a day pass to use the transit as much as you like for that day. Skip to this time code for my amateur explanation of the app. For my first trip, I kind of headed towards Miami on the 207 route. Then I got off at the Mercy route, and my goal was basically to reach the Vizcaya Mansion and Gardens, but I saw a cool religious building near the Mercy Hospital, and I stopped at the far end of the hospital to take in the views of this oceanside hospital. After that, I discovered the Imerta de la Caridad, which was blocked by a fence, so I had to walk around the whole perimeter of the hospital to get back to the road. The next available entrance was the one that led up to this fancy place, but it seemed like in this property area, it seemed like it was a lot of religious-oriented buildings. There was a lot of churches, some schools, and things like that. So after a bit of my walk, I finally reached it. And one of the things that kind of threw me off, or at least I thought was interesting, is that it kind of looked like that one building from Jurassic Park, the one where they ride up with those jeeps. So after circling the building, taking in the views, I headed back to the road for the Vizcaya Mansion. Now the Vizcaya Mansion is situated on a lot of land with large, beautiful gardens surrounding it, with a great oceanside view and an interior ripped from some period piece. When I arrived at the Vizcaya grounds, I was greeted with a trail surrounded by trees on both sides, with statues placed along the way. After paying the gate admission, I was immediately struck with the beauty of the walk to the mansion. There was these fountain-fed streams on both ends that led down to the location. I can only imagine what it'd be like at night. When it came to the gardens, it's sort of hard to explain what I felt like while I was walking them, but probably just mesmerized by the grounds. I just loved how there was so much nature around, making this old place feel alive with all the plant life and all the little lizards scurrying about. My favorite part of the gardens was this raised platform with all these trees encircling it. Or it was maybe the mini gazebo by the ocean that was just had this great view of the ocean, and it also had this view of this like stone boat that you couldn't reach. Now, for the interior of the Vizcaya, it was phenomenal. It had a ton of well-decorated rooms with beautiful ornate tapestries strewn throughout. My favorite spots was the courtyard and the main entrance with its intricate tiling. I just wish there was some party that was going on where I could sip some wine and eat some artery-clogging food, because that place would have been cool to do that at. So after the Vizcaya, I headed to the trolley stop that was going to take me to Miami, and I got to see some peacocks singing before my ride came. So I rode it until I was at the south end of Brusquel section to reach a post office to mail some of those postcards. Fun fact, I had no idea that there were special stamps for postcards, so I guess you learn something new every day. After walking a bit, I ran out of water and I got a refill from the nice folks from this restaurant. So sometimes signs are sent to you on what you're supposed to do, and this particular one came from the daily rain spells in Miami. I decided that waiting in the rain for a bus stop wasn't going to be fun, so I headed to the closest Metro Mover station. Now, something I should mention is that the Metro Mover, you just have to make sure that you're on the right loop, or I guess at the right station, because if you don't, you'll literally just go in circles and not reach the spot you want. Also, there's some stations that all Metro Movers go through, so if you're at one of those stations, your ride will eventually, come through to that station that you're at. Through the Metro Mover, I eventually arrived at the Frost Museum, which was mainly focused on ocean-oriented exhibits that were interactive. They also had a variety of sea life in these aquariums for everyone to enjoy. So there was multiple floors to this museum, with each section dedicated to a different aspect of the Earth. My favorite exhibits were the aquariums, especially with the one that was above everyone that's really cool to go see, and the planetarium, which has these hourly shows that focus on the Earth and other sciencey stuff. When I finished everything at the museum, I went outside to the upper floors of this place. And with these sections, they had these great views of the surrounding area, so I took advantage of that to take some pics and video. Unfortunately, due to the time of the day, I wasn't able to go to the Perez Museum next door. So I just hopped back on the Metro Mover to hit the next item on my bucket list, which was the Bayside Marketplace. So the Bayside Marketplace section that I was in had a lot of clothing and food options on the upper floors. I decided to eat at this restaurant, where I got myself a Cuban sandwich, mojito, and a new food discovery called tostones, which was good. So after this meal, I headed back to my room along the river to one of the drawbridges, and I caught some folks doing some tricks, which made the walk more interesting. But what I would say is that you got to make sure you are on the right side of the river, or else when they raise those bridges and they're pulling a boat through, you're going to wait a long time. For this day, I used the rail to get to the Black Police Precinct and Courthouse Museum, which was one of the first precincts in the nation to have black police officers. The museum has guides that used to work with the Miami Police Department that give their own account of working as a police officer during the earlier years, and some of the folks they knew who helped foster growth within their community. Also, you'll learn the origin of the symbol of the city of Miami. After this, I hopped on a bus for the Wynwood Art District to see the Wynwood Walls. One of the first things I noticed upon arriving was the graffiti and the wall art all around. There were some big chain stores, but at the very least they tried to blend in with their own unique art. As I was taking in the sights, I spotted a farmer's market of sorts that was primarily just food. There was a lot of good smells coming from this event, so it was nice to randomly come across it. So after checking out that farmer's market, I went to the main graffiti attraction. The Wynwood Walls itself is mainly a set of outdoor exhibits composed of statues, ground art, wall art, and exhibits in some of the buildings that have these pieces from various artists. The price of admission seemed reasonable for all the art that you get to see, so for someone like me who loves different mediums, this was a great place to visit. Be sure to get there at a good time, because if you're not, this place can easily get busy and swamped with a whole bunch of people taking selfies and then also taking in the arts. So on the final full day, I took the Miami trolley to go to South Beach to see the fancy houses, the strip, and the beach. Getting to South Beach by trolley was quick and easy, as long as you know your routes or at the very least use the Miami Transit app. When I finally reached South Beach, I headed a bit north to Collins Park and then worked my way south, taking pics of things that I thought looked cool. I eventually hit South Beach, where I got to see one of my favorite of all time art styles in building form all along the strip. Also, as a bonus, I got to see where one of my favorite films are made. Unfortunately, the CVS opted for a less colorful look to stand out from all the other buildings. So after checking out the Scarface Hotel, I eventually reached the pier, took some photos, then I rented a city bike to head back to go get some food, and then basically just called it a day after getting the trolley. For this day, I had to check out early, and since I had my bag and my luggage, I didn't want to walk around Miami looking like I just hopped off a plane. So I booked an Uber for the airport. After hopping on the plane, I arrived back in Dallas safely with a lot of pics, videos, and memories of this fun solo trip to Miami. Overall, this trip was something awesome that I needed badly in my life. This solo adventure happened at the right time and place, and I'm happy that I was even able to do it at all. I have some future places I'd like to visit that I'll be sure to post up on another segment of Millennial Travels. With that said, y'all stay safe and have a good one. Alright, quick little segment about the Miami app. If you're not going to rent a car, I highly suggest using the Go Miami app. An Uber can quickly get expensive, and if you're on a budget, you can use a public transit to get to where you need to go. You can search up specific routes if you already know where you might need to go. So if you're lost, you can also open up a map and see the nearest stop and then see where it can take you, which I thought was really cool. I happened to get some day passes for the time I was there, but you can easily get a weekly and a monthly pass as well. You just gotta determine what would be good for you. In my personal opinion, I made good use of it, but I would suggest getting a card just in case the app doesn't load properly, which that happened to me several times while I was there. Oh, and then to kind of circle back, the Metro Mover and trolleys are free, but they don't run, they're not 24/7. Now, when it comes to the buses and the monorails, those are paid, and that's where you're going to use your pass. But that is basically the Miami Pass. And with that said, y'all stay safe and have a good one.
Hello there, and welcome to Millennial Travels, a travel series on must-see destinations. On this episode, we're visiting Philadelphia, home of Rocky, Philly cheesesteaks, the Eagles, and much more. There's something for everyone in the city of brotherly love. And now, for the host of the program, Malcolm Wilkerson.
Thanks, David. Hey there, y'all. So let me get right into it. So after my first solo adventure, I thought I'd book another trip with my Go Wild Pass for Philly. I arrived at the airport around 7 p.m., but not at midnight like my last trip. Something that caught my attention as I was getting my bearings was some of the art they had on the walls. Some of the pieces they had were more traditional, and some were made out of yarn, which was pretty neat to see. So after admiring the pieces, I searched for the rail terminal to get to Philly on the cheap. Unfortunately, the routes I could take from the terminal wouldn't be close to my room, and also it didn't have an option to buy a SEPTA card. With it getting later, I figured I'd just get a rideshare to my room to do more research. Upon arriving at my Airbnb, I did a mini tour and looked up some spots where I could eat at since I came to Philly on an empty stomach. Luckily, there was this pizza joint called Southside Pizzeria, which had this spicy pie that I had to try. With my pizza in tow, eating some slices along the way, I headed to Sprouts to get some groceries for the coming days. When it began to rain, I decided just to hang out a bit and enjoy the ambience with my pizza. After getting the essentials like chicken, veggies, and turkey bacon, I went back to my room to rest for the next day. So before I get into the travel blog, I want to give a quick shout out to Die Hard Fan for making me a custom tie-dye t-shirt with a Liberty Bell on it. But let's get back to it. After mapping out a basic route for the day, I decided to head out to Philadelphia's Magic Garden. The weather this day was fantastic with a slight breeze with a light overcast. The walk didn't take too long till I started to see some murals on the walls. Some were small and some were 3 stories high, so that was pretty cool to see. For the buildings that were more decorated, it felt like they were just taken from some fantasy world and plopped right in this district. Unfortunately though, in regards to the Magic Gardens, I only got a sliver of the magic as the place requires tickets in advance, and there was already a large group at the event that arrived before me and they had bought their tickets in advance. The next tour was going to be an hour away, so I decided just to head to Liberty Bell instead. Now for my walk to the Bell, it was easily just fantastic. The old buildings with their brick exteriors were always around. Some were in a better state than others, but either way, they all had their own unique character that made the journey more interesting. Along the way, I got to see a mini concert from some event that was popping up in the street. I stuck around for a bit before going on my merry way to see some of the shops. One in particular had this really adorable little cat. Along the way, I got to see the Walnut Theater, which happens to be the oldest theater in America, and the Will's Eye Hospital, which is one of the oldest facilities in the world to specialize in eye care. The most interesting find, though, was the Public Ledger Building. The exterior was really fancy, but the crown jewel was the Wawa convenience store on the inside on one section of the building. They had some amazing iced coffee that was good at that particular time. For those who don't know, Wawa is a gas station chain that can be found in various states, but easily this is probably the fanciest one I've ever been to. So after the mini break at the Wawa, I went to the place that got me going on this trip in the first place, which was the Liberty Bell. Now, something to keep in mind if you're going to visit this place is that you may want to go when the hours aren't as busy, as each time that I passed by the place on my multiple days being there would always be a line wrapped around about halfway across the building. If you don't want to wait in line, there's a large window where you can take a pic of the bell on the other side of the glass. Luckily though, on my visit, I didn't have to wait too long. Now, you do have to go through security, so you may want to remove anything that may cause you to have to leave the line and come back. Once you get inside, you'll find a lot of displays that cover the history of the bell and the events that are influenced by it. The bell itself was made in 1751, which predates the formation of the US, which was in 1784. Also, the crack itself developed over the course of its life, with some repair work done on it. The white crack in the bell was actually an attempt to restore the bell's sound. After the bell, I went across the cobblestone street to the Independence Hall. Now, like with a Liberty Bell, you have to go through security, so keep that in mind before you have to make a run back to your car. Another thing is that you can only visit certain sections of the Independence Hall without a ticket. I was able to get into Congress Hall, which is awesome to be in some of the first places where the nation was founded. If you need to brush up on your history, they have park rangers telling you about the events that were going on at this time, along with some historical facts of the building and the surrounding areas. After the history class, I got into the random exploration mode, running by the Liberty Hall, Second Bank of the US, and some other buildings that looked neat as I headed to the Olympia Cruiser. Along the way, it was incredibly relaxing being surrounded by all these old buildings and finding the small parks along the way. It was the character of it all. It felt like I'd find some other unique spot that isn't just cookie cutter like some other cities are. One of the stops I made was this courtyard under some trees with these cute little sparrows just chattering all around. Another was this alleyway with this stone path, ye olde flags, old style lamps, and trees added some shade between the tightly woven houses. Maybe it was the connectedness of it all, or maybe it was just the cute little cellar basements. Further down, I found this housing unit that had a little arch that you had to go through to get into this small parking lot that had all these houses surrounding it. It was neat to look around and just imagine that what it may have looked like a couple hundred years ago. Eventually, I made it to South and Front Street, where I used this walkway to cross over the highway to get a good shot of the Battleship, New Jersey, and to get some grub at the chart house. I figured if I'm going to get a little rest in, I might as well eat and get a good view of the river while I relax. With some rest and food in my belly, I set off to the Olympia Cruiser. Now, unfortunately, the Bakuna submarine was not open at the time of my visit, but it was all good because I got to see the Olympia, which is the oldest American steel warship still afloat. Now, first off, one of the things I found neat was the fact that, well, it was a museum boat. So a lot of other places, you're actually, you're going to a physical place that was built for that purpose. It was fun to be able to roam the cabins, learning more about the ship, and to get a small glimpse of how it was like back in its heyday. One thing I should mention that if you're not a fan of stairs, this probably won't be the museum for you, as there's some steep stairs that can be quite steep and narrow. With the Olympia Museum done, I wanted to check out the harbor area nearby. If the museum wasn't your thing, then there's a lot of food shacks along the river's edge. Another thing that you can do is ride some swan boats for those +1 occasions, but on this night, there was no swan boats in my future as I was on this journey to see as many things I can do in one day. In that spirit, I walked down the pier getting more shots of the boats and the surrounding area. Eventually, I got to this raised platform and used it as my bounce back point and to basically just go back from where I came. Now, at this point, I haven't really had a solid meal since breakfast. While I did eat at the Chart House, it was mainly just light soup, so I needed something a little bit more substantial. I needed a Philly cheesesteak. So with that in mind, I looked up some places and chose Campo's Philly cheesesteaks. What surprised me was the sheer variety of cheesesteaks that they had. It felt like a pizza shop in terms of all the toppings a place can add, except on the sandwich. For me, since I like my spicy foods, I got the heater with all its cheesy goodness. For me, this wasn't as spicy as my Carolina Reapers, but for those who like a little spice in their dishes, this could be the sandwich for you. Overall though, I love the sandwich and it hit just right and felt like an amazing addition to my Philly experience. The plus side of my visit to Campo's was that Alfred's Alley was just a short walk away, so naturally, I set my sight on one of the oldest neighborhoods in the US. Upon arriving, I was greeted with the same old charm that a lot of the other houses had, except with this, some of the homes are over 300 years old. So it was a joy to walk through the history of this old place. Some of the homes have their curtains open so that folks can see inside their immaculate homes. One funny quirk of this is that they have modern appliances inside, so it's almost like two different worlds, with the ye olde exteriors on the outside and the ye contemporary interiors. With the Alfred Alley wrapped up, I decided to head back to my room. Along the way, I found a SEPTA station where I was able to purchase a SEPTA card for $5. Skip to this time code for more details on how the SEPTA card works along with the Philly Flash. With some turkey bacon in my stomach, I headed towards the city hall, taking in some of the views. Once in the courtyard, I headed east towards the Reading Terminal Market. The market itself is located indoors with some shops where you can get some alcohol, groceries, and some meats. The primary focus from what I saw was mainly the restaurant, or like basically the eatery component. Honestly though, if you were to try everything this place has to offer, then you could probably easily make it into a week-long food tour. Personally, I loved how much character this place had. It just had a lot of it. Every place felt unique, and it felt like it belonged there. And it didn't feel like, there was just something like this rubber stamp where, they just planted some place. If I was a local, I'd probably make this a once a weekly visit easily, just to check out what other flavor experience I can munch upon. The next spot was the Museum of Illusions. Well, honestly for me, it wasn't really worth the admission price. It had some neat gimmicks, but it felt like it could have had more stuff easily. You'll get more mileage out of this place if you go as a group, but if you're just going solo or for other folks, I'd just skip it though, especially if you're on a tight deadline. With the Illusion House out of the way, I hopped on the Philly Flash bus using my SEPTA card to get to the Eastern State Penitentiary. The prison itself closed many years ago, and it stood vacant for a period of time where the city played around with the idea of an upscale apartment complex or shopping mall. Luckily, those plans never saw the light of day, and now the prison serves as a museum and stands as a preserved ruin. Now, when I say preserved ruin, it means that the maintenance or the restoration efforts are restricted to just keeping the structure standing and to not just let it fall apart. One of the first things, though, I noticed upon arriving was the castle wall standing tall after all these years, isolating itself from the rest of the world. The architectural style has a bit of that gothic flair, which you can see at certain parts of the prison, and it gives it a more haunting atmosphere, especially when you hit the more run-down portions of the tour. When you enter, you're given a dial pad audio device that is used to listen to certain narrated parts or stories about the prison. When you walk the grounds, there'll be posts with numbers on them where you can dial that number to play an audio file that's relevant to the spot you're at. A good some of them deal with the history of the prison, from its founding to notable inmates they've had. Some of the posts are for art pieces within the prison walls, with interviews from the creators talking about their pieces and how it came to be. Now, for the grounds itself, most of the prison is open for you to freely walk around, but some sections are cut off, probably due to the state of those sections or the time of my visit. The main draw here, though, is going through the cell blocks and seeing the state that they are in now, and just imagining that a short while ago, there used to be folks stuck here serving their sentences. Some of the cell blocks were restored to what they looked like back in the day, but a vast majority of them are just left to fall apart in that preserved ruined state. Another thing I should mention is that there's a small exhibit on the grounds that talks about the current prison issue within the US and how many folks are locked up. So for those who want to learn more about the prison industrial complex, You can definitely get some mileage out of that exhibit as well. At the end of it, I thought this place was immensely interesting, especially learning how state-of-the-art it was back in the day, especially when you compare it to what the life for the average day citizen was at that time. I think this place would be great for those curious souls who want a bit of prison history while touring a dilapidated prison, one that especially has a lot of history within its walls. Also, I should mention they do have ghost tours for the spooky season, so that may be something to look into as well if you're in the area. After the prison tour, I walked over to the Philadelphia Museum of Art to see the amazing architecture and to see the rocky steps. For me, I love the tall windows, those robust pillars, and those low pointed roofs. The views from this place were fantastic as well, with the standout being able to see City Hall with nothing blocking my view, so that was awesome. Now, with this spot being as famous as it is, there were a ton of folks coming taking pics and doing the rocky run up the steps. At this point, we have to be real, because if you're in Philly and you're near this spot, it is your duty to run up those steps. So after running up the steps and getting some shots, I walked back down to take a pic with Rocky. After that, I just ate another Philly cheesesteak kind of like near my Airbnb and called it a day. On this day, the main attraction was the City Hall, but I want to give a quick shout out to KD JW5's David Washington for making the amazing intro to this video and for making me aware that there were tours at the City Hall. If you want to learn more about Philadelphia and the surrounding area, be sure to check out his channel. Link is in the description. But back to City Hall. Your best chance to get a view of the inside is to buy your tickets for either the Tower Tour or the City Hall Tour. I should mention that the City Hall Tour includes a ride up to the tower at $30, but the Tower Tour only includes a ride up to the tower at $15. So the first thing I did was a Tower Tour, and luckily for me, I was the first one of the day, and I got to be the only one to go up to the top for my time slot. So it was almost like I had my own private tour at the top of City Hall. The guide who took me was telling me fun facts about the tower and City Hall itself. The views were absolutely fantastic, and it was one of the few times in my life where I can get a nice skyline view of a city. It made it all the sweeter, with this being my first time at City Hall in Philadelphia. Also, if you like the history behind the statues at City Hall, then this tour will definitely give you that little tidbit that you need. After the tour, I was able to join the next one, which was the tour of City Hall. For this one, the guide takes you to different rooms in the building while working their way up to the tower. All the while, you're learning about the city of Philadelphia, so for the history buffs, this would definitely be something for you. At the end, you finally get a chance to go up to the tower, but it may take a while to get to the top depending upon the size of your group. The elevator is quite small, so it can get really tight when you do go up. After the tour, I went to the National Constitution Center to brush up on some of my old American history. The center covers a lot of different topics from the Civil War, Reconstruction, the 19th Amendment, and much more. My favorite bonus from this visit was a chance to see one of the original copies of the Bill of Rights. There were 14 total that were made, with one, or at least the main one, being in DC and the other 13 being in the original 13 states of the Union. After this though, I decided to call it a day and head towards my room, but not without having some birria tacos before I called it a night. So for this day, I sort of went on the lazy route as I didn't want to hustle like I did on some of the other days. In that spirit, I went back to the Philadelphia Museum of Art and checked out the area that was behind the museum to see what was all around. After that, I hopped on a bus to get near the Cherry Street Pier. At the time I arrived, it was fairly empty, with some shops on the right-hand side, but I think during the weekends this place probably fills up. But for my visit, I was mainly wanting to get a good shot of the Franklin Bridge. After getting my shots, I decided to cut the day short and just head back to my room and relax and plan on how I was going to get back to the airport, as I didn't want to book another Uber, and I just wanted to try the rails, as I basically was just using buses all over Philly, so I wanted to try the rails for the first time. To start it off, I went back to the fancy Wawa that won my heart and got myself a nice iced coffee. I relaxed there for a bit, then I headed towards Love Park to find a station near the Franklin National Memorial to ride a train to the airport. After getting my ticket, I hopped on the train for the airport. It's a pretty simple, lazy ride, and I probably got there within 30 minutes. After getting through security, I got to see some folks dancing and an odd Burger King that served beer, which was my first time seeing anything like that. Fast forward to my flight time, I noticed that there was some smog outside that was starting to get thicker. It turned out that the smoke was coming from the Canadian wildfires, which in turn caused heavy delays at the Philadelphia airport. In the bathrooms, the smoke smell was really strong and the airport was as cold as heck. But I think they cranked it up to filter out the smoke. So originally my flight was going to leave around 8 p.m., but due to the smoke, it kept getting delayed. At first it was about 30-minute delays, then it became hourly delays. Eventually, I got a notification from Frontier Airlines saying that, well, my flight wouldn't leave till 6 a.m. the next day. Luckily, I got food from the odd Burger King that was serving beer, and I had my laptop, so I was just doing random projects while passing by at the time. Around 2 a.m., I got an email from Frontier giving me a $75 flight credit to use on a future flight and a $15 meal voucher to use at various food joints, including the ones at the airport. So that took some of the sting away from the delay. Fast forward to about 30 minutes before my flight, I got myself a coffee and some fried rice. So when it came to the flight back home, there was a lot of open seats, which I think was because of the 9-hour delay. It helped me out though, as I was able to stretch out a bit and take a 2-hour nap. After the nap, I ate my fried rice, and shortly after that, I landed safely back in DFW. Overall, this was my favorite trip so far. There was so much to see and do in the area that it still feels like I missed out on a lot of different things. But really, it's impossible to experience everything in a city in just 1 week. I might visit again in the future to see some of the things that I missed, along with going to some of the outlying areas to experience more of Philly. But honestly, it was just amazing. I loved it from beginning to end, even with some of the other hiccups like the public transit. So with that, nice segue, now for the public transit. Now here's a rundown on Philadelphia's public transit. When it comes to paying a fare, you can either do it with cash or a SEPTA card. With the SEPTA card, you can load it like a debit card. I ended up getting the weekly TransPass Plus because it included a lot of rides, and plus I wasn't sure how often I was going to use it. I should mention that if you get the SEPTA card, that you get to ride the Philly Flash for free. So that might be an extra incentive for those wanting to take full advantage of the public transit. Now, to get the most out of Philly's public transit, you'll want to map out the route you want to use before you set out. If you don't, be prepared to hit some roadblocks if you're trying to figure it out while you're on the move, which is what I did. When you do find the right line, you're given a map of nearby stops of that line where you can select those points to see the ETA of the buses on that route. Another thing to note is that the rail lines are not included. For instance, if you hop on the nearest line near the Love Park area, basically to go to the airport, you're going to be looking at a $6.50 fare one way. Be sure to ask a SEPTA employee for more info in case you're lost. For me, some of the routes I picked through the app had some crazy delays where the ETA would stay at 10 minutes forever, so I would have to basically just walk to where I needed to be because I didn't want to wait any longer. The one that I had the least amount of issues with was the Philly Flash, which was fantastic for going to more of the touristy spots. But going back to the usual SEPTA public transit, when it was on time, it was awesome. It got me to where I needed to be. I just wish that it didn't have those earlier hiccups where basically the map was kind of inaccurate and the delays were just crazy. Whereas the 10 minutes was indefinite, or 10 minutes actually became 30 minutes. Overall, it was a mixed experience, but I blame a lot of that with my inexperience with Philly's transit. And with that said, I hope y'all stay safe and have a good one.
Hi there, y'all, and welcome to Millennial Travels, a series on fun experiences in must-see destinations. The location for this episode is... So let's get right into it. So after 2 successful trips, I wanted to switch it up and go to an island. With that in mind, I booked my ticket for another journey, but this time it was going to be a weekend trip, and I'd be playing with Frontier's 24-hour booking window. Whereas the previous journeys, those are basically where I had the early booking promo. The flight itself was pretty smooth and almost made me fall asleep a few times. Eventually, I landed a little after midnight in San Juan, where I got to experience some of the on and off again showers. When I arrived at the hotel, it started to rain a bit heavier. I was wanting to hurry up a bit because of that rain, so I went to what I thought was the entrance of the hotel. Unfortunately, all the doors on this side, at least the side I was on, were locked, and I didn't have service on my phone to make a call to the hotel. After pacing for about maybe 15 minutes, I decided to walk around the building to hopefully find some kind of door so I could knock on it. Well, the real entrance was on the right-hand corner of this building, so the mini disaster was averted. With about 5 hours of rest, I woke up somewhat early to get groceries from the local public store. To to have breakfast sandwiches for the next coming mornings. Along the way, I stopped by 787 Cafe to get some iced coffee for some quick energy before I booked my Uber for Old Town. After a short ride, I arrived at Plaza Cologne, where I took a selfie by the I Love San Juan sign, took a pic of this monument, and scoped out the buildings before I set off for the main attraction on my list. So the mission for this day was to see the Castillo San Felipe del Moro, but I was going to take the scenic route to get there first. Now with the term scenic, it was put in very lightly. Some of the streets were paved and others were of this cobblestone variety. Some of my favorite spots were the ones where you could see the oceans as cars drive towards it, and the part where the roads seemingly lead to this hidden drop-off point. The buildings themselves were like a bunch of pastel colors lined side by side in these long rows where you get a long, unobstructed view of a street. A lot of it reminded me of New Orleans' Bourbon Street and how the buildings were tightly knitted together, but all had their own unique mark with the shops at the bottom and lodgings on top. But also, in that it was the blend of the old and the new that gave these spots their own unique charm. A good example of this is when I turned at the Plaza de Hostos to see the Promenade of the Princess, with all the shop vendors flanking both sides of the walkway selling their wares with these old stonework walls and vibrantly colored homes as a backdrop. The path eventually leads to the Roots Fountain, which was a good spot to see some beautiful surroundings. After getting my shots, I headed up north to the Old Fort, which was awesome because I had some awesome oceanside views to my left and these giant stone walls to my right. Unfortunately, my oceanside trail was cut short as a big portion of the path was closed down, so I wasn't able to walk it all the way up to the Old Fort. But it was all good because there was one of the original gates to the Old City, which was the historic San Juan Gate, which I went through to see more of these beautiful homes and buildings. The other bonus of this alternative route was being able to go in these sentry boxes or watch points to view through the slit and imagine someone else that was in the same spot hundreds of years ago. Eventually the main path led up to this well-manicured hill with the Castillo San Felipe del Moro on the top of it. One of the first things I noticed was the size of the fort. Now I knew it was going to be big, but it was a different thing altogether when I got up to the front gate. The best way I can explain it is that the fort is comprised of 6 levels, with many nooks and crannies throughout. Getting through the admission is a short affair where you'll find a small courtyard. In this area, you can go to different areas where you can learn more about the fort and how it was like within those walls. On an interesting note, the fort took over 200 years to be completed, and during that time, it went through a lot of renovations and some battles. For me, I wanted to start from the top and make my way to the bottom. So I went up this ramp to get a good look of the surrounding area and enjoy the ocean breeze. At some points there were some steps that made it easier to climb on top of the walls. I had to be careful though because some of the stonework was more deteriorated at some areas than others. But there were some brave folks who got pretty close to the edges of the walls. Outside of some minor risk taking, I worked my way down to the lower floors where I checked out some of the museum pieces, but honestly, I was just enjoying the views more because of how much history was on both sides of the walls. I just wish I had a time machine to see how it looked like back in its heyday. After getting my fill of Fort Moro, I set off for the next cool site, which wasn't too far at all. I ended up relaxing for a minute on the soft grass to enjoy the warm sun while hearing the ocean waves on the other side. When I set off again, I followed the north wall, making some stops at some neat sites like the Bastion de San Antonio, the Santa Maria Cemetery, and some other eye-catching spots. After a bit of walking, I reached the Castillo San Cristobal. Now this is a hot tip in case you want to visit both forts. If you paid admission and kept your receipt at one, you can use that same receipt at the other fort, so do that if you want to save some money. But back to the tour. So after showing my Moro receipt, I got into the exploration mode to cover all the accessible parts of this fort. Now the main difference between Moro and Cristobal is that Moro was made for sea defense, and Cristobal was made as a result of 2 land-based attacks on San Juan. As for the size, this place was deceivingly big. The multiple levels and tunnels made walking this place a bit of a hike, but easily doable. I would definitely suggest wearing a good pair of shoes as this place seemed a little bit more difficult to walk than Fort Moro. Outside of the two, I think Moro was a cooler looking fort. If you want to learn more about the two forts, check the links in the description. After absorbing the amazing views of the Cristobal, I went to this nice food joint where I got some good drinks and a good burrito that had this delicious chipotle mayo sauce on the inside. After stuffing my face, it was kind of getting late, so I decided to head back to my room and relax and prep for the next day. Now for this day, I was wanting to catch up on some of the stuff I missed in Old Town. With that in mind, I got an Uber back to Plaza Colón again, then headed west catching some of the things that I missed. The first was a Balaha, which at the time was hosting an art show with pieces from various artists, which was a treat because I love art and I love all the different mediums that were on display. After this, I headed south to the Church of Jesus Christ to see this old place of worship. A nice bonus of this visit was seeing all these pigeons relaxing in these crevices in the wall, almost like it was like made for them. The area also seemed popular for feeding the pigeons that lived there. It wasn't until later I discovered that the area was called Pigeon Park. Next on the list was the Calle de la Fortaleza, which at the time had these bells hanging over the street instead of the umbrellas that are usually there. Also, the street was closed at the time of my visit, so couldn't do much else after that. So I then headed east along the south side of Old Town, passing by some of the cruise ship ports, which at the time had no ships, so there wasn't a lot of people crowding this area. After a bit of walking, I made it to the capital of Puerto Rico. At the time, I was having some work done on it, but hey, it was just nice being able to see it and admire the style of the building. With all the main sites out of the way, I just went on a lazy stroll to go to the beach, walking along the north side of Old Town to reach the El Escabron beach, where I just relaxed, taking in some of the awesome beach views, old fort walls, and just enjoying that nice cool breeze on this particularly warm day. After that, I just headed to Lot 23, where I got to have some mofongo with some side steak. Once my belly was full, I just headed back to my room to get some rest before I had to wake up early for my flight. There was one last treat that this trip was able to give me, which was the sights coming back home. Luckily, I was able to snag a nice cheap window seat where I was able to get a chance to see all the islands that we were flying by. It was fun seeing the boats cruising the ocean not too far off from some island nearby. Or my favorite bit was just how clear the water was at certain spots. For instance, on this day, there was a lot of partial clouds just floating around. So we were able to see those shadows of those clouds through that clear water. It almost looked like a bunch of mini islands just everywhere. Other than that, it was a nice smooth ride to get back to my usual stomping grounds. Overall, I love this trip. I just wish I had a couple more days to see more of the stuff I missed outside of Old Town. The history, the food, and the folks were amazing here, and I could not have asked for a better trip. I would suggest that if you do plan on going to Puerto Rico, be sure to check if your cell phone company provides service here. I didn't do my research on that part, so I had to rely on free Wi-Fi throughout the trip, which was tough. With that said, y'all stay safe and have a good one. Hi there, y'all, and welcome to Millennial Travels, a series on different travel destinations. On this episode, I'm visiting Chicago, the home of the deep dish pizza, the Bulls, the Bears, or the Cubs, depending upon what your favorite sport is, or as other people call it, the Windy City. Let's get right into it. So with this trip, it was going to be something like San Juan, in that I would only have a weekend to explore the city. To make the most out of this trip, I got a Go City Pass to do some of the big things like the planetarium, 360 Chicago, a riverboat cruise, and much more stuff for free. More on the Go City Pass at this timestamp. With a pass and plane ticket in hand, I flew to the Windy City and arrived at the PM hours. Then I kind of basically hauled butt to the Airbnb in Chinatown, where I got some good food before tucking in for the night. After eating a nice hearty breakfast of cheddar stuffed hot dogs, I set off for the east side of Chicago to see Lake Michigan and to walk along the lake's edge to see one of the Great Lakes and to hit up the sites that were covered on my Go City Pass along the way. The first view along this path was Burnham Harbor, which is Chicago's largest harbor and is nestled right in the museum campus, surrounded by a ton of popular locations. The first place I checked out was Planetarium. Now, when you get your ticket, you get a free showing to one of the movies in the domed theater. I opted for the moon showing since it dealt more heavily with the space theme that the museum was going for. The theater itself was within the massive dome of the planetarium with a wraparound screen and speakers to complement this experience about a little round ball circling our world. The rest of the museum covers the history of exploration from the days of boats sailing the seas to rockets to the stars. The bits that I love the most were the exhibits that go over our understanding and what we think is happening to our universe as time marches on. Once getting my fill on the space exploration, I headed outside to walk along the side of the planetarium that faced Lake Michigan. I relaxed near 12th Street Beach for a bit, then walked along the lake's edge, letting the waves flow over my feet while admiring all the boats that were on the lake. With all that water around, I decided to go to the Shed Aquarium to check out all the wonderful animals they have. At the time of my visit, it was crowded and it was hard to see some of the animals up close. Excluding some of the busier areas of the aquarium, it had a great variety of wildlife to see. The highlights for me was the stingray petting pool and the dolphins doing tricks in the big pool area. I just wish I was there earlier than 2 p.m. as you can feed the stingrays if you buy a cup of fish. So if you do go to the aquarium and you want to feed some stingrays, get there before 2 p.m. You might be able to feed a little stingray. After the aquarium, I headed over to the Field Museum of Natural History to brush up on, well, some of my history and to see the T-Rex skeleton on display. Now, one of the first things I would suggest is going here early, as the place is huge with lots of displays that can take a while if you're going to be going about reading the exhibits, especially those displays. Unfortunately, I got here about an hour before closing, so I basically had to speed run the museum. Out of the exhibits that I got to view, the highlights were the earliest formations of monarchs in Europe, the Native American wing, and the dinosaurs, especially Sue, the T-Rex. With the museum closing, I went around the corner to pick up a Chicago-style dog with no ketchup to add more to my Chicago experience. Honestly, I could do without the giant pickle, but otherwise, it was good to have while I pushed on closer to the downtown area. Along the way, I stopped by the Buckingham Memorial Fountain and the Yacht Club, where I got a mini refreshment while checking out all the fancy-looking sailboats that were docked in the area. Eventually, I made it to the Chicago River, where I got an amazing view of the river with some prime real estate while some boats were cruising on by. With most of the big views out of the way, I winded down a bit and wanted to take a break and hit some pins. So I went to 10 Pin Bowling Lounge to play a few games and enjoy some slices of pizza. After I took some shots of the downtown area at night, I then decided that after walking so many miles that day, I figured it would be a good idea to head back to my room to get some rest. So with the Go Wild Pass, one of the stipulations was that I had to book 24 hours ahead of my flight time. So I woke up around 3 a.m. to book my ticket, only to find out that Sunday was all sold out. So the only flight that I could get back home on that weekend was a Saturday around 7 p.m. With that, I booked my ticket with a tear in my eye and I went back to sleep. In the morning, I had a tight timeline on the stuff that I could do before I had to fly out. So I quickly got to Navy Pier Marina to hop on a tour boat to get a different perspective on the Chicago River. Now with the tour boat, it had a large open deck that gave folks a nice unobstructed view of the buildings while cruising down the river. It also had drinks for those who worked up a thirst while looking at the buildings. Luckily this day wasn't hot, so there wasn't really a chance to be baked alive in the sun. My favorite part was just looking around at the bridges, buildings, and the overall scenery while getting a history lesson from the tour guide. At a certain point though, I just sat back and relaxed with all those cool views just cruising on by. After when the tour was done, I walked over to Millennium Park to get a shot of the Cloud Gate, or as some folks call it, the Beam. Unfortunately, as of right now, the park is still closed till 2024. But there was one last thing I had to do before I left Chicago, and that was to have a deep dish pizza in Chicago. The pizza itself was fantastic and reminded me of when I made my own crustless pizza with how much ingredients were inside. On that note about the deep dish pizza, if you want to get that style of pizza, you might want to call ahead so they can prep it before you get there. They told me it would take about 40 minutes for it to be finished. So for those on a time crunch, this may not be the best option if you need a quick bite. With my belly full, I headed back to my room to pack my things to head to the airport to hop on my ride back home. Overall, I had fun despite my shorter than expected trip to the Windy City. I did miss some things, but I also saw a lot while I was there. The river cruise was number one on my list of things to do, with the Skydeck or 360 being second. I'll definitely visit Chicago again in the future to see things that I missed and to grab me another deep dish pizza. Now the Go City Pass is basically a ticket to see multiple places under one pass. The Go City Pass offers many options to fit someone's needs based on what all they're wanting to see. Being as it was my first time in Chicago and using the pass, I wanted to experience as many cool things as possible. For the trip, I got the all-inclusive 2-day pass, which covered the big stuff that I wanted to see while I was there. So the way that it worked, at least for me, was that I downloaded their app, logged in, and had a QR code that folks at these locations can scan to verify that I had the pass. It was quick and painless, so I had no complaints in using the pass. I also believe there's a print-off option for those who don't want the hassle of having to basically pull up an app, especially if you have like data issues. Now, the cool thing with the pass was that I could use it multiple times, so it wasn't a one and done deal. For instance, if I wanted to do the river cruise on each day I had the pass, I could have done it. I could have done it Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, or whatever how many days I had the pass. It's just I can't do it multiple times on the same day. I believe that had to do with the sort of pass I got though. Just be sure to read the fine details, as some attractions tell folks to reserve a slot ahead and others say, oh, this is only one day, but just check the details and you should be good. But with that said, this was my short but fun experience in the Windy City. Y'all stay safe and have a good one. Hi there y'all, and welcome to Millennial Travels, a series on different travel destinations. On this episode, I'm visiting Baltimore to experience its rich history while enjoying some of the simpler joys that only a city like it can offer. Let's get right into it. My flight to Baltimore was simply awesome, in that I was able to get a whole row to myself. At first, I thought it was going to be packed with some other folks. As I saw the number of people began to dwindle, it became apparent that a lot of us, including myself, would be getting an unexpected upgrade for our trip to Baltimore. Upon arriving at BWI, I hopped on the Baltimore Light Rail, which has trains arriving roughly every 30 minutes. The fare was cheap at $2, which was one of the cheaper instances for me to get to the city from a major airport. The train itself was fairly smooth, with the rougher parts being when it changed paths. Otherwise, the train got me to Camden Yards, which luckily was close to my hotel. Due to the timing that I arrived there wasn't much I could do, so I grabbed some grub and prepped for the next day, which was going to be jam-packed. So every journey begins with a single step, or a hearty breakfast for me. The hotel that I got served a good continental breakfast, which had a great selection of fruits, pastries, sausages, eggs, yogurt, and other trappings of the American breakfast. With my belly full, I set off for the Enoch Pratt Free Library, which was a free library that serviced the public by providing lots of study areas and other spots for those needing a quiet place to do some studying or reading. What drew me here was the architecture and some of the beautiful paintings that were hanging in the main room of the library. After the library, I headed to the fantastic Walters Museum. The museum itself had some awesome exhibits and interior design. Now, I'll be the last one to get into the debate on designing a room, but with this place, I loved how the rooms matched with the items they housed. For example, the Renaissance one had high walls, arched ceilings, and wallpaper that looked like it was ripped from some period piece. They also had a variety of items from different eras, from the Syrian stone tablets, Egyptian busts, old European paintings, and some vases from Greece and the Asian Pacific. My favorite things of the museum was easily the design of the building, but if someone forced me to pick an item, I'd have to go with the old stone chest. There's just something about old ancient carved stones that just fascinates me. After the museum, I headed to Baltimore's own Washington Monument, which isn't as big as the DC version, but it's still worthy of a visit. Normally, visitors can walk to the top to view the city from the 4 openings at the top. Unfortunately, due to some recent storms, the lighting in the staircase was knocked out, so they weren't allowing any visitors to the top. For those who were wanting to get an idea of what the top view would have looked like, they have some podiums at the bottom that have a touchscreen display where you can view the tower in a 360-degree angle of the city. So, best thing that you can get if you can't go to the top. After some quick shots, I headed to the Peabody Library, where I found out that the place was closed despite me seeing that it was open online. And while that sucked, not being able to see 2 cool places, I figured that, well, there's always another time to revisit Baltimore. With 2 strikes in a row, I decided to go east, seeking answers along with guidance in other aspects of my life. Luckily, I found them at the Ministry of Brewing, which had a welcoming atmosphere and good drinks to ease a weary traveling soul. So for context, the Ministry of Brewing set up shop in a church building after the old owners left. A lot of the old furnishings are still inside, including some of the religious paintings. They also have events going on different days of the week, along with some local food trucks that pop on by to add some food to the mix. For my visit, I simply got a flight to kick back and rest a bit before I set off for the next leg of my journey. With some good drinks under my belt, I set off for Patterson Park, or Hampstead Hill, where a major battle of the War of 1812 was fought. The park was a short walk up the road from the Ministry of Brewing. The main thing that drew me here was the Pagoda, which had a nice unique look that you don't really often see in the US, and plus, the thing has been there since 1891. With a pagoda though, you can't go inside or go up the tower, so at least you can look at it from the outside. Now the park itself was pretty large, with a lot of wide footpaths and greenery for those who just want to enjoy some lazy days in the park, or those who want to get in some daily exercise in. For me though, my daily exercise was just beginning, as I had to go to the Canton Waterfront Park to start the next leg of my journey. When I got to that point, I took some shots of the surrounding area and began to walk along the north side of the harbor with the intention of walking every possible corner until I reached the USS Constellation. Well, to say it was a walk was an understatement, but a good one though. There was something about walking along the harbor's edge that was energizing for me. It might be because, like with the Philly area, it had a lot of history and it made it much easier to imagine someone else walking along the same general area so many years ago. Outside of the nerdy history stuff, I simply enjoyed it because it felt like I would always see something different along the way. But in general, it was just relaxing to walk along the edge while getting some shots in every so often. Now sometimes walking a city can be daunting, especially if I'm going at it for several hours, but it seems like anytime when I'm on these marches, I discover something cool along the way. In this instance, it was the top of the world observation level at Baltimore's World Trade Center. At first I wasn't sure about paying to go up to the top, as I didn't know about this place when I was doing my research. Well, honestly, it was worth it and then some. The admission was about $8, and when compared to a helicopter ride, it's vastly cheaper if the mission is just to get some awesome views of the city. Once you reach the observation deck, you'll find that there's windows on all sides, and there's always a spot where you can get a great view of the city. Just be sure to time your visit right, because if you come later in the day, it can be difficult for you to take pics of the city, which happened to me because of the setting sun. Other than that, I'm glad I found this place randomly along my trek that day. So after that, I simply moseyed my way up the road to get some food from a local Thai place and called it a night to get some rest to be ready for the next day. After another hearty breakfast, I got an Uber to reach Fort McHenry. Now, for the fort itself, it covers a decent plot of land where you can walk amongst the old walls, barracks, and other fortifications that made this place a tough cookie to crack. If you're wanting to learn more about the fort, there are some exhibits within the different buildings on that land that gives you an idea of what it was like being stationed at the fort, along with some of the design aspects of the fort, including an early version of a bomb shelter. Luckily for me, I got to see a lot of unique things while I was at the fort. The first thing was that they were celebrating Defenders Day, which celebrates the battle where Baltimore repelled the British during the War of 1812. They had folks dressed up in time period outfits from that era, so that was definitely a treat. The other bonuses was getting to see the Pride of Baltimore sailing near the fort and witnessing a citizenship ceremony within the courtyard of this historic fort. After the fort, I hopped on a scooter to head to the Baltimore Museum of Industry. So the bread and butter of this museum was all the antiques they had and how they paint a picture of all the industries that were operating in the Baltimore area. From a simple radio to a big linotype machine, they had many great pieces from the past in great condition, so that was awesome to see too, seeing all this old equipment. My favorite part was the sections where they decorated like how it may have looked like back in the day. So it was like the theming of it that really drew me in. It almost felt like I was stepping into different movie sets whenever I walked into one of these themed rooms. Also, be sure to check when they have their volunteer linotype operator in. He only comes in on the weekends and his hours can vary, but it'd be a treat to see someone work this machine that was used in a lot of printing. Next on the list was Federal Hill Park, which at one time had a fortification on top of it, but it has since been removed, and in its place is the park we have now today. The views from this hill were fantastic, especially if you're wanting to get a good shot of the harbor area. If photo ops aren't your thing, then there's plenty of greenery to lay upon if you have that lazy bone in your system. Now, after all that walking, I was feeling a little bit lazy myself, and I wanted to kick back a bit while still enjoying Baltimore at the same time. So I set my sights on a nice harbor cruise with Watermark to scratch that itch. I was able to get the best of both worlds by seeing a lot of the great sights while relaxing at the same time. During the tour, they played some recorded narrations that talk about the history or cool facts of the buildings that the boat passed by. The tour passes along the south side of the harbor till it reaches Fort McHenry, where it then turns around to head back to the original ship-off point. After the tour, I went to the Bird's Nest near Oriole Stadium, where I got to enjoy a nice drink while watching a tense game of Jenga. After the show, I grabbed some grub before the sunset tour began. Now, the main difference between a regular harbor cruise and a sunset one is the time and price. The price for the sunset tour is roughly about $8 more than a regular one, but it goes a little bit further than just Fort McHenry. Oh, also, instead of recorded narration, they play some pop songs while you're cruising on the waterway. For me, this was great because I love being able to capture beautiful moments while relaxing at the same time. Now, the best part of this tour was an unexpected one. So after we hit our turnaround point, we started to slow down near Fort McHenry. As folks started to get confused as to why we were slowing down and basically stopping, the boat captain got on the speaker to announce that in celebration of Defenders Day, there'd be a fireworks show near Fort McHenry. When the fireworks began, I started to think about how technically my day began and ended near Fort McHenry. The fireworks were just a fantastic addition to the tour and a way of celebrating the end of another successful trip to a new city. Overall, I had a great time visiting Baltimore over the weekend, and I was glad that it turned out better than I expected. I definitely plan to revisit that place sometime in the near future, but there's many other places that I got on the list, and I gotta hit them first before I revisit some of these old places. But with that said, I hope y'all stay safe and have a good one. Hi there y'all, and welcome to Millennial Travels. In this video, I'm visiting Boston to experience some old charm that only this city on the harbor can offer. Let's get started. On the first day, I arrived at the Boston airport in the PM hours and hopped on the Silver Line, then switched on to the Red Line to get to the station closest to my room. To say this was the easiest ride to get to my room from the airport would be an understatement. The other one that was pretty easy was when I traveled from Baltimore. Now when it came to my Airbnb, it was pretty nice. The house was a little bit older, but it had some nice charm to it, which made it a nice rest after a long flight. After settling down, I went to get groceries and stopped by Cafe Polonia to get some grub. I got up early to do some MBTA research and to get a 7-day pass on my Charlie card. If you want to get more info on the Charlie card, skip to this time code to learn more about it. So after getting my pass, I went to the Franklin Zoo. My timing wasn't the best though, as it was raining and some of the animals were not let out due to the low temperatures, so this was an instance where you should visit the zoo during the better weather conditions. But it was still a treat to see all the animals that were out and about. After the zoo, I walked over to the Samuel Adams Brewery at Jamaica Hill. The tour was short but sweet. The guide gave a brief history of how the Samuel Adams brand came about, along with the philosophy of the beer franchise as well. After the history lecture, the guide taught us how to assess a beer's quality, like someone would do with a wine or a cheese tasting. Now that taste lesson had a reasoning behind it besides giving folks another tool under their belts. The location where this tour was happening turned out to be their main hub for trying out new flavors. Apparently they'll make roughly about 400 new flavors, with only about 1% making the cut every 2 years. Well, some of those beers served on the tour are tasted to determine if they may hit store shelves. After the tour, I headed to the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum. The place was about 3 stories of ritzy glamour, and it felt like what you'd get if you cross a church, a mansion, and a museum all in one spot. The grounds were beautiful, with the garden easily being the highlight of the whole place. Not to say the rooms didn't have any eye-catching designs, but after when you've seen a few rooms, the rest seems to kind of blend together. After the museum, I decided to walk over to Prudential Tower. Now, this is located in the Prudential Center, which in itself is basically a large indoor mall with a ton of places to shop and eat at. My goal, though, was to go to the Prudential Tower observation deck. 50 floors later, I get to see some amazing views of the Boston area. For those who want more than just views, they have a bar on the 49th and a restaurant on the 48th floor. At the time of my visit, it was at night and misty, making it a bit harder to get some certain shots of the city, but it was still great to see the night lights of the Boston area from that observation deck. So after the tower, I headed northeast to go to a place where everyone knows her name. Fast forward the rainy walk and I arrived at the Cheers bar. The place was busy, so expect some long wait times during the weekend hours. The food I got was decent, with my only real complaint is that the cups they use for the beer isn't served in a mug like the ones in the show. Instead they opted for one of these little mugs that seemed to be more for coffee or some other type of drink, which I'll have to be honest was a little bit disappointing, especially after watching the series from beginning to end. But overall, it was still fun being able to visit this iconic spot after so many years of wanting to stop on by. I hopped on the number 8 bus for the southeast end of Boston with the goal of seeing the JFK Library. Once in the area, I got some shots of the calf pasture pumping station to get that architectural fix. I then walked by a local college to reach the Commonwealth Museum. The museum covers important events of pre-American history to events after the formation of the nation as well. The highlight of this museum was easily the historical documents on display, from the likes of Winthrop to a copy of the Declaration of Independence. On a more random note, The building also serves as a state record center for the local area. With the Boston area history covered, I walked over to the Edward M. Kennedy Institute. Unfortunately, the place was closed. Turns out, you have to do a group reservation Tuesday through Fridays. Next to the Institute was the JFK Library, which was open at that time. While it has a library in its name, it's more of a museum dedicated to one of the most popular presidents in American history. The JFK Library was like the ultimate spot to go if you need to get your JFK fix in, and would be a great way to learn more about the president outside of some video documentary on the man. The exhibits contain a wide array of materials from or about the president, as well as displays that give the proper context in which JFK lived in and helped shape. I definitely recommend this museum for those who want to dig more into the JFK era of American history. After the museum, I threw on my rain poncho to walk along the water's edge to reach Castle Island. Along the way, I took a lot of photos and videos of this scenic walk to the historic fort. I'd lie though if it wasn't tiring, what with the rain and all constantly landing on me, but it was the best way that I could think of at the time to see all the cool things along the way. So fast forward the first leg of the journey, I reached the Pleasure by Flagpole. I got to see a cool scene of the Head Island Causeway flanked on both sides by the sea water, with a plane flying overhead every 2 minutes or so. When I hit Head Island, I took my shots and then proceeded to Fort Independence on Castle Island. The walk to both islands were a lot of fun to do, as the paths were fairly long, with both destinations feeling far off. But more so, it felt like a movie in that you see a character walk a long distance to reach the next leg of their journey. Upon arriving at Castle Island, I walked along the east end to see the Bay Area along with the boats cruising on by. Once I got to the west end, I grabbed some food at Sullivan's Castle Island to fill my belly up. The staff were fantastic, but I just wish they had some seating on the inside for those lovely hard weather days. After the quiet bite, I went to the front entrance of the fort only to find out that it was closed. From my understanding, they do tours for a greater part of the year, with me just missing their last tour by a couple of weeks. While it did suck to find out the hard way that the place was closed, despite what Google was saying, it was still nice to travel there because I got to see a lot of cool stuff along the way, and just to feel the scope of this huge fort. After the fort, I hopped on a bus heading towards Harpoon Brewery near some of the docks of Boston. With me being soaked from the rain and still tired, I decided to get a flight of unique flavors and a nice big pretzel with some cheesy garlic sauce for a nice taste experience. My favorite part of this experience was just getting to relax, enjoy some treats while watching the rain pitter-patter on the windows with folks going about their day.
You're on your first step towards...
I hopped on the Red Line to Boston to get to Long Wharf to get on one of those historic boat tours of the harbor. The boat itself had a lot of seating, but luckily for me, there wasn't many folks at the 10 a.m. tour that day. For those who like laid-back rides with a bit of history, this ride would be a fantastic thing for you. It starts at the Long Wharf, then sails to Fort Independence, where it then heads to the USS Constitution before returning to Long Wharf. If you're in Boston for a short stay, I would definitely recommend this. After the cruise, I did some walking around the harbor's edge till I reached Quincy Market and Faneuil Hall. Quincy Market felt like a mall food court in the main hall and a tourist shop trap on the sides. Faneuil Hall had some touristy vendors on the ground floor with a mini history exhibit downstairs. For me, I enjoyed relaxing near Quincy Market, watching as the yellow fall leaves float about the footpaths with these historic buildings as a backdrop. It definitely had the right vibes for that midday relaxing escape from the humdrum trappings of life. Just down the street a little ways was the Old State House, where I got to stand at the Boston Massacre site where one of the biggest events involved with American Revolution took place. This is where I started part of the Freedom Trail to see some of the famous locations till I reached Acorn Street at Beacon Hill, which is one of the oldest cobblestone streets in the US. If you happen to find yourself in Boston with some time to spare, be sure to check it out, as it's one of the most scenic city walks in the US. With the day still young, I decided to do the Prudential Tower again to get a view of the city during the day, where I was able to get some better shots of the Boston area and relax a bit before the next exciting spot on this spooky day in October. While I was surfing my phone of things to do, I found out that there was going to be a Halloween celebration in Salem, Massachusetts. Seeing as it was Halloween, I got a round-trip train ticket for this famous witch hunting town. Upon arriving, I was greeted with a town in the full swing of the Halloween spirit. Honestly, I had a lot of fun walking around this place, as it felt like those days as a kid walking through my neighborhood all dressed up, getting candy, while seeing other families doing much the same thing. Also, it felt like I was going through the film Hocus Pocus. Oh, quick edit, it turned out a lot of the places in Hocus Pocus was actually filmed in Salem, Massachusetts. So when it came down to it, I really honestly wasn't planning on visiting the town during this whole trip, but because of how that day was going and because it was Halloween, I
I decided to do it. So it was an awesome way of capping off the day on one of my favorite holidays of the year. I hopped on the Red Line with the intent of seeing what Harvard was like. Unfortunately, we had to stop near Longfellow Bridge because a train ahead of us had some sort of issue. So after waiting for a good while, I decided that, well, maybe I should change my plans for the day. Instead of starting off my day with Harvard, I began my day with the Museum of Science. Honestly, the Museum of Science is just alright. It seems more geared towards families with young kids, so I quickly just went through the place to head to the next cool spot on my list. Well, after a bit of walking, I made it to the USS Constitution. What makes this ship unique is the many successful battles it's been a part of, but nowadays it's known as the oldest active military ship still afloat. One of the things I loved about this ship was being able to walk around the deck and climb one floor lower to check out the interior of this sturdy little duck. There's just something about being around something with this much history that just fascinates me. I just love it. With that sturdy old duck out of the way, I skipped on over to Bunker Hill. At first, I thought the place was closed because of the scaffolding at the top, but it turned out they were just doing some restoration on the tower. Luckily for me, I was able to get a chance to climb the tower, which made up for when I wasn't able to climb the one in Baltimore. After the tower, I had quite the appetite for the day, so I hopped on a bus to stop by the Boston Sail Loft, where I got to enjoy 2 fantastic bowls of clam chowder. Unlike the previous day, the Red Line didn't have any issues, so I was able to tour Harvard and MIT to get into that college feel again. The grounds and buildings of both schools were beautiful. I liked Harvard's old charming buildings and MIT for the fantastic view of the Charles River. After getting my fill of higher education, I went on a tour of Fenway Park, where I got to walk around one of the oldest baseball parks in the nation, getting some nice shots in of the park while learning some fun facts about those early days of the park and the many additions that were made to update it. I would definitely recommend it if you're into baseball or the Red Sox. With my baseball itch satisfied, I strolled on over to the Museum of Fine Arts of Boston to experience some of the finer things in life at one convenient location. The place was massive, roughly about 3 floors dedicated to showing off artifacts and pieces from various cultures throughout history. The sheer variety on display was what first took me by surprise, as some of the museums I've been to will have basically a limited amount of items on display that aren't really that big. But with this museum, there were some statues that were as tall as the statue of David, to paintings that could easily cover a whole wall of a family-sized home. My favorite part, though, was just being able to sit back and relax while appreciating the small details in some of the more busy canvases. This day, I was wanting it to be a little bit lazier than the previous days, so I decided to start it off with the Freedom Trail, to walk the portions I didn't get to see earlier in the trip. This was especially fun for me as it was easy to imagine someone else like me walking through the same area all those years ago. All the sightseeing eventually had me winding up at one of the main reasons I came to Boston. So with the Boston Tea Party Museum, the main draw is being able to get on the replicas of the famous ships involved with the Tea Party and being able to throw tea into the harbor. The people working there are dressed in time period clothing to get folks more immersed in the setting while talking about the events leading up to the party on the water. One thing that surprised me was how small the ships were. For some reason, all these years, I sort of imagined those guys getting on these humongous ships and dumping a stupid amount of tea into the harbor. Despite the fantasy meeting reality, I still enjoy getting a close representation of the ships of how they were like all these years later. After getting a feel for the place, I decided that the best thing to do next was to get me a drink and kick back and enjoy the view at one of the biggest starting points in American history. This day was pretty simple. I just took the transit to the airport and basically just waited until my plane arrived so that I can hop on it and get on home. I think the easiest way to finish this off is how all these trips started when I booked my first solo trip to Miami, which quickly grew into more places like Philadelphia, San Juan, Chicago, Baltimore, and then finally Boston. The only thing I can really say about the experience was that it was unbelievable, and that I'm happy that I got the chance to do all of it in 2023. I'm hoping that I'll have more opportunities like this in the future, in 2024 and future years. Maybe I'll get the chance to go somewhere outside of the US. Who knows? So one of the biggest things I would suggest is familiarize yourself with the transit map of the Boston area. There's a ton of train, subway, and bus routes that'll get you right where you need to be, or at least within walking distance. The easiest thing for an out-of-towner is to get the Charlie card, which you can get at most MBTA stations. Be sure to ask an MBTA employee for help if you're having any issues.
Well, with that card though, you can go to the ticket machines to load the card with funds or a pass. I opted for the 7-day pass as it gave me unlimited rides for the days I had it, which I used it a lot. When it comes to finding out what station you need to be at, I used Google Maps, which was pretty dang accurate in getting me to where I needed to go using the public transit.
For the most part, it didn't really fail me that often. When it did, it was kind of like a rare occurrence, but for the most part, it always worked for me. But with that said, y'all stay safe and have a good one.